Ich freue mich, dass wir zu unserem nächsten Highlight des Tages kommen, inhaltlicherseits. Und wen wir jetzt hier im Studio beziehungsweise gleich virtuell zugeschaltet begrüßen dürfen, seht ihr in unserem Speaker-Trailer. Los geht's. Ja, und zwar begrüßen wir bei uns Daniil Pavliuchkov, Head Product and Growth Lead von Tier Mobility. Hallo Daniil, ich grüße dich. Hello, nice to meet you.
Hey, hello everyone. Nice to be here.
Thanks for having you. Where are you located today? From which location do you join the OMKB?
I'm also in Berlin, in the northern part of the city, in Pankow.
Okay, so you're not that far away, honestly. For all spectators at home from OMKB, we have to admit that the following talk of Daniil will be held in English. So, and the Q&A session afterwards also, because Daniil, you're more familiar with English, right?
Yes, I'm not a native German speaker, as you can recognize from my name and last name, so it's much easier for me to talk in English.
Okay, I get the point. But I will talk about you and share some details with our OMKB community so that they have the chance to get to know you a little bit better. And I will do this, Daniil, in German because I know that you understand most of the parts I'm going to say.
Alles gut, bitte sehr.
Perfekt. So, Daniil bringt eine große Passion mit ein, muss man sagen, für das Thema Product Management. Und er hat schon in verschiedenen Startups und Scale-Ups in der Vergangenheit gearbeitet. Immer auf den Themen Fokus, Growth und Monetarisierung. Ganz aktuell, ich habe es gerade erwähnt, ist er Head of Product and Growth bei Tier Mobility und seit mittlerweile 2,5 Jahren im Unternehmen aktiv. Tier Mobility kennt ihr sicherlich alle, weil sie ja insbesondere mit ihren E-Scootern und Fahrrädern entsprechend einen Großteil letztendlich der Stadtkulissen beispielsweise in Berlin auch prägen und natürlich auch in vielen anderen Städten aktiv sind. Über seine Aktivitäten bei Tier hinaus ist Daniil freiberuflicher Coach für das Thema für Produktmanager insbesondere mit seiner Brand product-universe.com und hat schon viele berufliche Stationen hinter sich gebracht. Ich will euch nur ein paar nennen. Er war beispielsweise vor seiner Zeit bei Tier Mobility als CPO aktiv für das deutsche Fintech Verleih oder aber in seiner Karriere Head of Product bei Argo Trade Solutions. Zudem, Daniil, bist du auch als eigener Entrepreneur schon aktiv gewesen, unter anderem mit deinem eigenen E-Mail-Startup Mailburn und hast deine Karriere begonnen seinerzeit mit dem klaren Fokus auf PHP-Entwicklung. And as I'm informed, Daniil, you're working fully remote, isn't it?
Yes, for the last 3 years I've been working from home office.
Okay. How does it feel to you working every day at home? Are you used to it, or do you see any disadvantages?
Well, I moved to a new apartment a couple of months ago and now have a dedicated home office room.
Okay.
And it feels amazing. So I'm not disturbed and I have a lot of focus. So for me, it's much better than coming to the office, except for the social interaction. I, of course, miss my colleagues. So we spend more times on team events and hanging out together when we have chance.
Okay, I see. What's your focus right now at Tier Mobility? On what products are you working at? Can you give us some advice?
So the growth area consists of the acquisition and activation of users, making sure they engage with us and we retain them over time. It's also about messaging and how we send them pushes or emails with some of the promotions. Third part of it is monetization and revenue management. We have some referral mechanics. So all that together is a growth area, which I'm co-leading with several other people. So it's pretty dynamic. It's everything except the ride itself. So we're not doing parking, we're not doing starting the ride, but everything on top of that, from registration until you become a power user, that sits with us.
Okay, thanks for explaining this to us. And your talk is having a German title, warum digitale Produkte die Grundlage für Wachstum und Skalierung sind und wie man sie am besten umsetzt. So you're going to share a lot of information with our audience in the next 30 minutes, I guess, Daniil, and afterwards we're going to have, as usual, at our OMKB, a Q&A session with us where we are going to ask you questions out of the audience or direct questions that we have in your direction. I hope, Daniil, you're fine with this and you're ready to go.
Absolutely.
Okay, then it's your stage. Viel Spaß, liebe OMKB-Community. Have fun with Daniil and his title, warum digitale Produkte die Grundlage für Wachstum und Skalierung sind und wie man sie am besten umsetzt. Daniil von T-Mobility, let's go.
Perfect. So that title was a working title. I decided to simplify it and keep on the last part. How can you actually manage the growth in digital products? And I'm going to be talking about one of the frameworks, which is called growth stages. That will give you an overview of how you can actually drive it from the product perspective. So before we go into that, I would like to talk a little bit about what kind of growth we might experience and see in the real world. And that's a question to the audience. Will I be able to see some kind of feedback? Do we have some interactivity parts in the call, or I just need to go through the slides myself?
Through the slides yourself, and afterwards we can catch up with feedback in the chat.
Okay, let's do it this way then. Let's see how that goes. So let's go to the first type of growth that is usually observed in a production on factories. Like you add more factories, you get more output. Or when you have sales demos, you add more salespeople, you get more sales. Then same could be observed with the social ad performance. You add more budget, you show more ads, and you get more impressions as well. My question to you would be what type of growth that would be, how that would look like, and how would you call it? You can go through this exercise by yourself. Since I'm remote, we don't have direct connection to the audience, but what do you think that type of growth could be? And that's first is the most popular and probably the most boring type of growth is a linear growth, where the more you add, the more you get out. It might look a little bit different. It doesn't have to be by 45 degrees angle. It could also decrease a little bit or be more steep. So that's linear growth. And that's not super exciting because it's very predictable and it's very difficult to scale. You scale with resources. There is a different type of growth that we can see in real life and in product and technology as well. And that usually, like from real life examples, that's any sports performance. Probably when you start going to a gym or doing yoga, you improve your skill quite fast. And then it's a different growth trajectory. Same for language proficiency. Same you would notice in the referral and virality in general. Or if you have features per sprint, what would be dynamic when you add more developers to the product team? How many more features they would be able to produce with every new developer? So that was a question to you as well. What do you think is this type of growth, how it is called, and how that would look like? And maybe you remember some of your university time or school time, and you would recognize this word because it's called logarithmic growth. And it looks like this. It usually has a very steep uplift at the beginning, and then you have a decline over time. As with, like, for example, sports performance, you usually get into decent shape rather quickly, but to get professional athlete with great results, it's super, super difficult. Same with developers. You can add a few developers to the team and your speed will increase, but after a while, the results will be diminishing. Let's take a look at the third type of growth, which from the real world examples is more about transmission of the virus. So we live in pandemic times and we experienced that many times already with different variants. This is the same what is happening to your savings account over time, over years. Usually content acquisition works the same way and the brand power also develops the same way. So this is the third type of a common growth trajectory or chart that you can experience. And that is called actually exponential growth. And everyone wants to have it because it goes up and doesn't have a ceiling and it looks amazing on your chart if you can, like, that's the hockey stick, the famous one. So the same, like, for example, content acquisition. It's very difficult to get returns when you write content and distribute it, but at some point your content base becomes so powerful and massive that it starts to accelerate faster and faster and faster. Same with the savings account. If you keep it for 30 years, your compounding interest is going to give you an extremely well result. So in technology, almost nothing goes according to those three growth trajectories. It's not linear, it's not exponential, it's not logarithmical. So in technology, or in technology sector in general, any business, any product, or even the feature itself, or the entire growth of the company is following a different type of growth. And it is called S-curve growth, which starts as an exponential growth at the very beginning and then becomes logarithmic growth, and it slows down. So we're going to be talking about this curve and how you can actually use it to understand where you are in your company or in your product and what you can do about it. So I'm going to be using this image until the end of the presentation, and we're going to go through all of those different stages, because every stage behaves differently. And if you go into mathematics, that's going to be a different formula. But for us in business and marketing and product, it's important to understand that we have other rules and laws behind every part of this S-curve growth. So as I said, if you take a look at everything that is in technology sector, it's usually a very slow start. You need to invest a lot of resources. Then once you hit product market fit, you get into the growth phase where everything goes really, really up and high. And at some time you will plateau, because growth cannot go forever, and you will hit the natural ceiling of your current value. And this is usually what businesses go through. As I said, a specific product offering goes through, or maybe a specific feature, which could be invite a friend or like a loyalty program. They also go through this chart. It again could be a different shape, could be a different dimension, but give or take, it goes through different three stages. And we're going to go through them one by one. The first one is called the adoption stage, because this is the most important problem that you need to solve. You need to get awareness for your product, and you need to get good adoption. That is a question, and the end result will be your product market fit. And there are specific things that can help you solve this adoption problem rather successfully. The first one, and probably that's not going to be a surprise for you, is to narrow down your focus. And that could be narrowing down by the audience, or geographically, or by the use case, so that instead of getting really broad and solving everyone's problem, you become the best product or the best service for a very specific audience, and you narrow down and become smaller. It's much easier to be in a community of 100 people than to be in a community of 1 million people. And usually things develop step by step. You cannot jump a few steps in product. That's usually not how that works. The second technique that you can use, or a method, is to use unsustainable promotions. And you can think about this adoption stage is like starting a fire. If you need to start a new fire, it's best to start the smallest fire first. That is your narrowing down. Alternatively, you can start pouring gasoline on your fire. It's going to be super efficient, but it's going to be quite expensive, and you cannot do it forever. Same with promotions. You can use them to boost the awareness and the adoption of your product. It could be free access to premium features. It could be buy one, get two, or buy two, get three, or something else. Like it could be brand activities, could be PR, something that is unsustainable and expensive on the long run, but it's perfectly fine to do in the beginning so that your product is out in front of your audience. The third method that I would recommend to use is a piggyback, which is less known, but is super, super efficient. And that means, like, if we continue this fire analogy, when you want to start a small fire, quite a good technique is to find an already existing bigger fire and just light your fire from that. So if you're doing something that is around video, it maybe makes sense to use YouTube as an acquisition channel. If you're having a product that is working with photo editing or images in general, maybe Instagram is going to be a good platform. So piggybacking is when you find a very stable and open product on the market, you integrate with them and start to get and you can get to their users so they know that your product exists. That has happened with Instagram in the beginning. They were a separate company back then, and they integrated with Facebook, so you could post on Facebook and people would like and see that's a branded Instagram made by this app. They would go click, download, and stay within Instagram itself. So they would be piggybacking on Facebook. Facebook definitely recognized that and bought the company quite fast. Same happened with Twitch, which is a streaming platform for gamers, and they were using YouTube as their platform. Initially, they didn't have a lot of people on their platform, so whenever they stream, they also output the stream to YouTube, and they branded again with a logo that it would be Twitch TV, and then people would get curious, click on it, and stay on the platform, and eventually they would be able to not, I would say, borrow some of the users from a bigger platform to their own product. So that's might be a very interesting mechanic for you to explore as well with your products when you're on the adoption stage. And the last method that I would recommend for you is to, in general, do a lot of work manually, because when you're an adoption stage, most likely you don't know a lot about your customers. You don't know the ideal customer profile. You don't know their best use cases. You don't know the biggest pain points. You're still investigating a lot of things. Your product market fit might not have happened yet. So it's best to be very close to customers and do those demos manually and do those sales calls and reach out and talk to them and have video calls and emails. And a lot of manual work is going to be paying off because you accumulate knowledge, you accumulate understanding about your space, and that will help you go through the adoption stage to go to the next one, which is the most exciting one for any company. This is when growth actually happens. So this is just 4 methods. Probably there are more of them that exist. They work really well on this stage. And I would recommend to using them when you don't know what to do. Just say, okay, can we make it smaller? Can we start a smaller fire? Do we have a budget for gasoline? Do we have a partner that we can integrate with? Or do we need to do something manually because it's low scale and it's still doable? The second stage of growth and how you can work with it is the optimization stage. And that's the most cool one because you have volume here. When you have volume, you can do optimization. And if you improve something by 2%, it might give you 1 million of revenue. If you have only 1,000 active users, improving their experience by 2% is going to be giving you 20 new customers, which is not super exciting on that volume. So doing optimization when you don't have volume is usually a waste of resources because optimization also takes time. If you look into A/B testing, experimentation on monetization and pricing and retention mechanics and so on, they all require a big volume of customers. That is achievable both in B2B and B2C, doesn't really matter. And the best method that we have found out that are working on this stage is, first of all, to remove the bad friction from your service. And friction come in 2 different formats. First one is the physical friction, when you need to click on a lot of screens, you need to submit a lot of forms, and it just takes a lot of time for you to get to the value. And you can simplify this friction, and there are many ways of doing that. That could be autocomplete, preferred settings, and many other ways of doing that. Could be single sign-on is a good example of like sign in with Google. That is removing bad friction from the sign-up experience when your presentation and the form could have many, many fields that you need to fill. So the second method is a sister of this one. It's called adding good friction. And by good friction, I mean something that actually lengthens the process, but it does it in a positive way. I will give you an example that in Germany, German people are quite serious about security and data protection, and it's very important. That could be even a blocker to register in a new service when you don't really trust them, how they handle your personal data or how they work with security in general. And sometime like 5 years ago, I think, Twitter was expanding into Europe and they were entering different markets. And Europe is a very interesting case because when you're talking about US, it's homogenic. It's one, let's say, big country with the same market, with the same currency and same mentality. But Europe is a collection of multiple smaller countries. And they have the same currency, but it's a completely different cultural background and focuses. And they didn't have a lot of success with Germany. So they recognized that Germans are really passionate about security. And they added mandatory second factor authentication to their login and registration. So you would not be able to register with Twitter if you don't connect your phone number, which is a very time-consuming second step, an optional step in the majority of the markets. And they actually observed that when they make it mandatory, the conversion from visit to sign up increases, although it's an extra step. And that's a very good example of positive friction or a good friction, something that lengthens the process, but makes the process more robust, trustable, secure, and so on. You can also add good friction by celebrating good moments and adding more emotional feel. Like it's not just success button and that's it, but you have some kind of success screen that gives you a little bit of an overview what has happened. That could be about reports and summaries by the end of the month, like what has happened with your account. That's also additional stuff, but it's a good friction. So when you have optimization stage, those things, removing bad friction or adding good friction, can improve your conversion by a few percentages, but that on big volume is a big difference for you. A third method that we figure out that works really well is to attract similar users. And when you've been on the first adoption stage, you were figuring out your product market fit. You were needed to understand what would be the value that is so good for my users. They're ready to pay for that and invest their time and resources and money to get this value. And you have unlocked them. You have found those audience, and it's best to capitalize on that. Like, you don't really need to start looking for new audiences yet. It's best when you start, okay, if we're really popular with students, how can we get more students on our platform? If we're really popular with people who are working remote from home, how can we get more of those in our product? So once you figure out your core audience, it's really good on the optimization stage to just keep attracting those similar users until you run out of them in your geography or in your use case. And the fourth method is also similar to the third one. It's to increase the usage frequency. So if people have been using your product every week, how can you make them use them twice a week or 3 times a week? If they've been using every day, how can you make them use it 2 or 3 times a day? You get the logic. So usage frequency is very important for, let's say, food delivery. If I order from a restaurant once a month, it's good. I'm a monthly active user, but how can you make me a weekly active user or a daily active user? That is really interesting, and it's a good growth topic. And as you see, you're still staying with the same value, let's say food delivery. You're still staying with the same user group and geography. Nothing really changes. The only thing that you optimize is you optimize the frequency or the engagement with your product. So optimization stage is about capitalizing on existing values that you have, in making them better, making it feel better, having more of the users that you already have, or making them use the product more often and more frequently. That is the goal of the optimization stage. And if you really want to make this chart part of the graph be very steep and go really high, you really need to invest, because compounding things, small improvements in the cross of different parts of the application will give you good results in the long term. So that's the optimization stage. The last one is the expansion stage. And this is when you start to plateau and your business has a lot of users, has a lot of growth, but doesn't have a lot of acquisition momentum, and people just don't really come. And you kind of run out of people that are attracted by your product. And that should be the focus when you're on the last stage of your maturity of your product or a service, is to expand into something new. And if you remember, when at the beginning in the adoption stage, we said that you need to narrow down and simplify everything, this is the moment when you need to start going big. So you need to add new product values to your service, to expand into new use cases. What else can you do? If you're doing food delivery, can you do flower delivery, for example? It's not so crazy different, but it's a new value. If you've been working with a specific audience, can you attract a new audience? If you're really popular with students, how about you go into people who are just in the first year of their job and profession? If you've been working in this market on Europe, how about you go into Middle East? So adding new stuff is the moment. It should be done on the expansion stage when you run out of the existing value. It's actually best to do this consecutively. So first you find the value on the first stage, that's adoption. You figure out the value, then you maximize and optimize the value delivery. That's the stage number 3. And the third one, you start bringing new values. And of course, this new value will go through the beginning, through the same idea. You start at the first stage, you go to the adoption, and then optimization, and then expansion one more time. So you actually start to build those waves one after the other. And of course, here, what can help you as well is to start doing partnerships and integrations with other players, because you need to add new value to the product, but it doesn't mean that you should be delivering this value by yourself. That value could be provided by another company, and you just need to partner them or integrate with them. If you have a food delivery, you might be partnering with another app that is doing something in this transportation, for example, and you would be an aggregator within their, like, say, taxi service. And you can call a taxi, but you can also order a food delivery, let's say. So that would be a partnership with someone who is not really working on the, so you don't have to do the value yourself. And usually you want to be clear where you are in terms of your product, services, and which value you're solving. Because at the beginning, you don't really know what your value is. In the middle, you really know what the value, and you optimize it. And in the end, you run out the value, and it's not enough to attract new customers. So you need to come up with a new value or with new audiences and new use cases. So this is a very simple framework. You can explain it to your colleagues. It's very easy to do, but it helps you to make decisions what to do next. And how to focus your resources. When people have no idea about this framework and they're working in the digital space with digital products, usually there are several common mistakes that are leading to each other. The first one is, of course, you don't know what is your growth stage. And the problem with that different growth stages, they have different rules and they have different mechanics and they require different approaches and different methods. So if you know your stage, you can choose your method correctly, which is the second problem. People are using wrong methods. If you're just starting out and you start to build new functionalities and do partnerships, you're on the first stage, which is the adoption problem, and you try to extend your value. Most likely you're going to get diminishing results because that is not your core problem at the adoption stage. The adoption stage, people don't know that you exist. It's not really about the value itself. Or when you want, you're on the last stage and you have optimized everything and you're plateauing and you keep optimizing, but your optimization efforts, they, instead of giving you 1% or 2% uplifts, they give you 0.1, 0.2, and it's like 10 times smaller. And of course, there is not longer any significant impact on revenue, for example, on your acquisition. So again, if you're using optimization when everything is pretty much is already optimized, that's not going to give you good results. So it's really important to understand where you are on the growth stage and select the correct method from that stage. That will give you the best results. Of course, you can experiment. That's a flexible framework. It's not a rule book, but it gives you good understanding. And then the last problem is when you try something and it works, you don't really know why it worked. If you optimize sign-up experience and it worked, then you optimize it further and it doesn't work. And you say, okay, I don't know why. First time, everything was good. Second time, it didn't really help me out. So if you know your growth stage, you can pick the right growth methods. And when you use them, you're going to understand why they worked or why they didn't work. And that becomes a system. And when you have a system, it means you understand how things change, you are in control, and you can design a specific growth trajectory that you need for your product and the service. And at the same time, companies have different features going through different stages. Like one feature could be at the adoption stage, the other one could be an optimization, and two more could be at the extension. And then you open a new business model, and instead of doing deliveries, you're doing something else. And it's again starting at the adoption stage. So at the same time, the companies all go through, everything goes and they through this S curve, and they are being placed on the different parts of this curve. So this is the framework that I wanted to share with you. It's very lightweight and simple. That's actually the end of the presentation. So before we go to the Q&A session, I would like to ask for your feedback. So that's a QR code if you've never used it before. So just go to your camera, scan it. It's only had 3 questions. It usually takes 30 seconds, 1 minute to answer those questions. I would really, really appreciate what you think about this presentation, if it was helpful or what would make it even better for you. And that is the end of my talk. I am now happy to answer your questions and take it from the audience, or we can go online in the end. You can find me on LinkedIn, my website. My email is also here. Happy to continue the conversation there.
Hey, Daniil, thank you very much for speaking about your experience of product development and the different stages I heard the first time today within the S-curve growth of products. I'm curious to know, which 3 questions are you asking in your feedback?
The first one is the NPS. How likely would you recommend this talk to a friend or colleague? And the second one, what did you like about this session? So I know which parts to keep, because I always change my presentations and I A/B test everything, let's say. And the third one is, what would make it even better? What would you like to have here? And people could be commenting, oh, I'd like to have interactivity, have more, maybe specific examples and so on. So that helps me to improve it the next time I'm going to be speaking about this topic.
Okay, wow, great. So you're measuring your own NPS on your different talks you're having on conferences?
Every time.
Okay. Do you tell us your NPS score right now? Do you public it, or is it just for you?
So I usually start with, it's a new brand new talk. Okay. My NPS is around 20 to 30. And then I'm usually doing the same talk 3, 4, 5 times within the year. And every time, once I get this feedback from, 20 people, 100 people, I optimize it, I add something, and I usually go from 20 to 40, from 40, I go to 60. And then if still I have more things to optimize, I can go to 70. But I think 60, 70 is my usual score after several approaches to the presentation. My best result was 82. I was never able to get higher than that, but it was like mind-blowing. Was with a storytelling for product managers. I did it, I think, 6 times last year, and I got good feedback. I incorporated that. So over time, I just made this presentation much more valuable.
Well, that's very impressive and data-orientated at the same time. And I guess you're the first person I get to know that's measuring their NPS on their talks. So chapeau on this. Thanks for modeling the S-curve growth and the different 3 stages that you have been talking about. The adoption stage, the optimization stage, and the last stage, the expansion stage. And I would like to start with the questions regarding or following your structure, Daniil, with the adoption stage. You've been talking about unsustainable promotions within your adoption stage. And if I'm thinking of startups and grown-ups, especially in the German, but also in the European market, I'm just remembering I'm seeing a lot of unsustainable promotions, especially in this adoption stage to become or to get the opportunity to get in the optimization stage afterwards. So what I mean, I'm seeing a lot of couponing, for example, of big companies like Getir or Gorillas boosting awareness, and I guess fasten their cash burn rate very, very much in this phase. Do you think these unsustainable promotions have a chance to build consistent customer relations and loyal customers, or are they going to leave the company when the unsustainable promotions stop?
Yeah, I like this question a lot. I think it touches on a lot of pain points that we experience when we look at this, like marketing budgets and the strategy behind customer acquisition. I think it's important to differentiate here what is the goal of the promotion, because there are different types. You can use promotions for acquisition, and you can use promotions for engagement and reactivation, and those are slightly different. So what Gorillas is doing with those things, they're trying to reactivate you as a customer. And if you give you, say, 10 euro discount, your lifetime value is probably around 50 euros for them. So giving 10 is mathematically sustainable. So I think they have a lot of smart people who are understanding what is the life cycle of the customer, and they just don't randomly give it out to everyone. And that makes it very sustainable. So you need to segment your specific audience. Like those people get a promotion, those people don't get a promotion. And there is a goal and the target behind each promotion. At the very beginning, the unsustainable promotions, and when your goal is just attract interest, and that would be you open a restaurant and the first 2 weeks, every menu item is 30% off. Unsustainable will give you into negative profits and revenue, so you cannot do it forever. But people will get to your restaurant, they will order something, eat something, and some of them will like it and come back later and pay full price. And they know that this is a promotion only for the new business opening. It's not going to be there forever. So those are different promotions. I would treat them also differently. And if they go into negative in terms of customer acquisition cost and lifetime value, then it's unsustainable. And you need to be smarter about it and segment it different and have a audience cohorts and so on. If they're sustainable, it's just part of your monetization and engagement, which is totally fine.
Okay, thank you very much for your clear answer on this. Is there any kind of timetable, any kind of time orientation guiding me through these stages? Like in the adoption stage with a new product in a new market, I should only be a maximum of 6 or 9 months, for example, before entering the optimization stage to help me identify if I'm able to reach this stage or if I maybe should stop the product at home and go to the next one. So is there any kind of time frame, or I assume this might be your answer, it really depends on the product?
I would say if you're looking for an answer to a question like should I continue or not, that is the wrong question. Like you need to continue if you believe in your product and you think there is a potential. I know teams and companies who've been for 2 years trying to find their product market fit, and then they grow tremendously. I also know companies that been doing that for 2 years and they shut down. I remember that Tier, when they launched, they went through the first stage in like 2 or 3 months.
Okay.
And then it was immediately high volume. And Gorillas also scaled super fast. Within like 6 months or 9 months, they opened a few shops in Berlin. And then like by their second or third shop, it was clear that, yeah, it works. So different companies go through that differently. Yeah, it depends. I would say there is no recommendation. You just need to know, like, if you're spending more time into that, will it be worth it? If you're a founder or entrepreneur, most likely you don't want to be building something for more than a year and stay in the adoption phase, unless this is your, life dream, this is your purpose, and you strongly believe in that, because it's just much easier to try something else and build it next year and until you find something that works. If you're really like pragmatic entrepreneur, then yeah, I would say under 1 year on the adoption stage. If you are visionary, passionate, and this is your like calling, then you don't need this. You don't have this question at all. You just continue.
Okay, got the point. Thanks very much. You're focusing with your work right now on tier mobility, looking at the core business of tier mobility. Would you agree that tier mobility is in some markets still in the optimization stage, or are you in the expansion stage already with all of your core products?
Oh, we are doing all of the stages at the same time. That's okay. Hyper growth. You go through all of them in parallel. Our core business is, of course, I would still say we are in the optimization, because there's a lot of stuff that we can optimize and we get good return, like 2% uplift, 5% uplift. So that tells me that there is more to optimize. Whenever our experiments start to get 0.1, that would be a signal to me that, yeah, probably we need to figure out a completely new value. So when it comes to the rental business itself, I think we're in the optimization phase. Mm-hmm. When it comes, we're also trying expansion. We're also going, you've seen e-bikes and mopeds. That's an expansion. It's very similar, but it's still a new value. It's a new vehicle, requires different approach. Some of our product ideas are at the adoption stage. For example, we have a long-term rental, which is called My Tier, and you can rent a scooter for, let's say, 40 euros per month, and it's going to be individually yours. It's a private leasing, and that's at the very beginning. It's an adoption stage. So we're trying different things. The company is having enough resources and backing to do everything. That's a luxury of having good investors and a huge market, but not everyone is there. So if you have constraints, it's best to focus. But Tier is doing everything at the same time, because it wants to grow and change something on the market.
Okay, one last question from my side, and then I will pass over to my colleague Shahab. Looking at your product at the optimization stage, you have been talking about removing or adding friction, for example. So is there a kind of goal in your company, a kind of goal for you in personal, and how many tests and product changes you're going to drive for example, in a month? Is there a quantitative goal, or it also always depends on customer feedback and the problems you see?
So we don't have a specific goal of the number of experiments. We try to we plan how many we want to do, but it's not a strict goal. Like we need to do 5 or 10 or 20 or 2. There is no number. Usually when we have, Tier is a very data-driven company. So we have the data team is bigger than the product and design and research. We have, I think, like 80 people working in data in total. It's like massive. Mm-hmm. So everything that we do is through data and experimentation. And when we are planning our next roadmap, we think, okay, we have our model, and those things contribute to revenue. Those things contribute to engagement and retention, and those contribute to acquisition. We have one team. They can do this change or in the middle on this side, and that change we can forecast that it was going to be, 2% approved to revenue, or it's going to be 1% approved to acquisition. Which one should we be doing? We run through the model and we understand, okay, 1% of acquisition, top of the line, is going to be much higher in terms of revenue in total. If we just optimize the revenue itself, it's the bottom line. So we say, yeah, this time we need to go in acquisition. So every time when we decide what experiments to run in which direction to work, we go through this mathematical scientific exercise to understand what could be the potential uplift. At the beginning, we were quite wrong with our estimates. Now I think we are pretty much calibrated on the outcomes. Mm-hmm. And when we run out of experiments that were going to give us meaningful uplift, we're going to say, okay, the time for experimentation has passed. Optimization, like not so much to do. We need to start thinking bigger and do something else. And usually it's like when you have one team, Here we have 15 to 20 product teams in parallel, and some of them are doing optimization, some are scouting for new ideas. So over time, you always have material to work on. And again, it's a luxury of having a big organization with a lot of resources. You are covering a lot of bases. So answering your original question, no, we don't have a specific target by number of experiments. We usually pick the experiments that give us the biggest North Star uplift or revenue uplift, and then we switch between different topics.
Okay, thanks very much, and impressive to have an idea of your structure you have in product development and management. There's some time left for some more questions. So, right. Shahab, it's your turn.
Thank you.
Hand over to you.
First of all, thank you for your deep dive, Daniil. We got some questions from the audience that we have translated from German to English, so let's dive in. Let's talk about the adoption stage. How can I not let the focus get too big in this stage? Startups tend to want to start with a broader scope. How can I do research to get a good scope?
So usually you move between those two things. You start big to get a big coverage, and you get, let's say, 100 customers, but they're all very different. And then you see, oh, those specific customers, they stay, and the other 70 drop out. So you focus and narrow down on those 30 only, and you really go deep. So it's okay to start big and then go small. And then once you figure this out, you again go big. So you always need to kind of change between different modes of your thinking and working. And in general, you will narrow down a specific audience, because if you remember this, early adoption, early majority, late majority, laggards, and so on, this curve with a chasm at the beginning, this is what you want to go through, but you need to identify who's your early adopters and early majority. And that's usually the narrowing down exercise. You start big, but then you think, who has the most problems in this space? So you can also think about product market fit as the value from your product should justify the effort. So if the value is really, really high, you're going to go through a lot of effort to get that value. Makes sense. But if the value is low, you will not want to spend more than, 10 minutes of your time to get this value. So you need to find the audience. And this formula is always subjective. It depends on the customer profile and the audience. So you need to find the audience for whom that will work, for whom the perceived value is going to be very high when the effort is going to be quite low. And then together it makes product market fit for this particular audience. And you need to find the audience that is big enough, has money, wants to solve it, and so on, and start building from that. That's usually the goal and the logic behind this adoption phase.
Okay, big dreams, small steps. All right, let's go to the next question. Daniil, I think you already answered this question, but we have got some questions about it. So let me repeat it. How do I protect the company so that users do not count on discounted products in the long term?
How do you protect the company? I don't think I understand the question.
So this question is, when I use discounts in the adoption stage to get bigger, how can I protect my business model in the long term so that the user do not want to get discounted products all the time?
Okay, so I got it now. So yeah, people say, like, before it was cheaper, why do you increase the price? I'm going to move away.
Right.
So first thing, communication is really important. If you do this as a promotion, you need to say that this is a special promotion, only for first-time users, only for the first 30 days, only when you have one active product in our service, and so on. There is a limit, and you clearly state that this is a limit, and after that, it's going to be different. It's like a kind of free trial and freemium combined, let's say. So communication is important. And then if people don't like the new price, that is also for you a signal and a learning. And you need to understand what it means. It could mean that this target audience is not your ideal customer. It could also mean that your pricing and price point is too high. It could mean something else. When you see this is a signal from the market, and you need to interpret that. And it's a data point, but without explanation, it doesn't mean anything. So you need to decide, am I going to survive if I keep the high pricing point? Will my model work out? Or no, I need to optimize my costs, and so on and so on. So I wouldn't say that there is one specific way to protect you from that, but best if you communicate it clearly. And when you have a response, you need to understand what is actually meaning for you in terms of business model, in terms of your ops costs, in terms of your time to value, and so on.
Okay, great. Let's go to the optimization step. The next question is, how big is the risk if you try to increase the usage frequency, for example, by email or newsletter marketing without producing churn or annoying user?
Well, there is definitely some risk. That's why I recommend you to A/B test it. And if the net result is positive, that's okay. That you're going to lose some customers, but the others will have much more engaged relationship with you. The point behind the frequency is that this value should be expected by the customer. So let's say if I'm ordering food and I'm doing once a month because I have, my special, last Thursday of the month, I treat myself to a nice restaurant and that's my behavior. But if I do it more often, I still get nice food. And that's a value that I will appreciate. If you're trying to send them the same value that gets repetitive, it doesn't really help. You're going to push away people. So it's a question of what actually are you trying to increase? Is it the value that you're increasing, or is it just a communication touch point? Because the touch point itself doesn't bring value for the customer. Everything about the product and like modern startups and product-led organizations, so on, it's about the value. Every time you have a touch point with the customer, you need to deliver the value for them. If you want to increase the frequency, the value should be also more frequent, or maybe even a little bit better because it's more often. If you break this rule, then people will see, oh, there is no value in this communication, in this touch point. I don't like it. They're annoying me. So it's really, you need to be careful. It goes down to testing and experimentation. You can't logically come up with an explanation. You really need to test for your audience, because most likely they have different expectations and they have different needs from your product, because they are the users of your product. You're most likely not the user of your product, at least not 100%. So testing it with the audience, they will tell you for sure.
All right, thank you. We have two questions left. Is there any company that has implemented the S-curve near perfectly, in your opinion?
I think Pinterest has done a really good job. I would say Airbnb as well. And I would say that Slack is also really good in this front. There are many companies who are following this logic. They call it different. Some call them growth loops, S-curve, growth framework, acquisition, engagement, retention, and so on. They all have different names, but the logic is more or less the same. And it's being used by Dropbox, by Netflix, Spotify, like many successful companies. So few that comes to my mind immediately is, I would say, Airbnb, Slack, and Pinterest. I think they did a really good job going through those different stages.
Okay, great. Last question, Daniil. You have named some frameworks. Are there other frameworks that can be used to dive deeper into the topic of growth you can recommend?
Yeah, definitely. I would recommend you to Google, which is called growth loops. You can also try to query compounding growth loops. And that's a really nice framework that capitalizes more on that and tells you how you can go into deep details. So again, this framework is being used by the same companies that are already named, and there are a lot of materials about it on the network, especially if you start to talk to people who are like VP of growth or director of growth and they've been doing this full time. They usually know what you're going to be talking about. So growth loops, I would say, is a good start entry point into this world.
Thank you so much, Daniil. Super interesting to listen to you. Mario.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's the end of our Q&A session with Daniil. It was really a pleasure to have you here at OMKB, Daniil. And best regards and greetings to your Berlin apartment. Looking forward to see you in the future. Thanks a lot for having you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Have a nice rest of the conference.
Well,
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Cheers.